Okay, yeah, my audio is working. I guess I'm just checking with the sound guys. Are we starting earlier or are we at capacity? Okay, amazing. So thank you for joining me today, everyone. Great to see this be so busy on day 2. Yesterday was crazy as well. And today I'm going to be talking about breaking batch. Just for a quick show of hands for context for me as well, is anyone here working data engineering as a role or something like that? Okay, are there any sort of BI analysts? Anyone in that kind of space? I see a few. And what about people who might be more in the product engineering side? I've got a couple over there. Great, well, nice for me to understand, and just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Alex Stuart. I'm a senior solutions engineer at Confluent, working with companies across the world, especially in UK, to help them take their journey into event streaming. And I want to talk about breaking batch because that's where I started my career. I worked as a DB2 engineer on mainframes at a credit bureau, and my life was built on batch. Every single night, a big chunk of data came from banks from around the world, landed at this credit bureau, and we had to process that overnight. And I got to see firsthand, what challenges that created, what pains that made, and what leads us to where we are today. And to quickly do a bit of fan service for anyone who saw the title and thought I'd be talking about the hit AMC show Breaking Bad. You might remember this quote from season 5. They really start making some money off their illicit trade, and they didn't know what to do. There was just so much coming in. Skylar, I gave up counting it. And that's what started to happen in the world of data. You probably started building businesses 50, 60 years ago, or even hundreds of years ago, the Medici using their ledgers to manage their trade around the world, with one single source of data, one place to go. But businesses began to scale. Commerce got faster. You started using digital devices like iPhones or smartwatches to begin to build an industry where data is no longer an exhaust, it's a differentiator. Whether that is your real-time delivery services, whether that is your trading apps, whether that is being able to make sure fraudulent activity isn't happening on your credit card. Data is no longer a spare thing, something we store in our business in case it provides an opportunity. It's what's allowed some of these businesses like Netflix or Uber to take over across any competitor. And having a rich view of what our customers do, what our sort of business flows look like, is how we not just compete, but survive in modern industry. But this is all built around processes that we may have been doing for centuries, and certainly have been doing for decades, where we see that original data source, probably coming from our operational domain, and we ask the question, how do I send this to my analysts, the 20% of the room who put their hand up before? How do I get that data to them in a way they can understand? So I grab an ETL tool, I extract, so I pull it out. If I have a data lake, then maybe I just dump that straight away. I'm going to sort that problem out later. And then I begin to consume that data. So I do my transformation, my T. There's a problem there that I maybe have someone transforming that who works in my data domain, is a data engineer. And although they are experts in dealing with those transformations, they may lack some of the domain expertise of where my operational source came from. And then I have to load that data somewhere as well. So I have another step. And you can probably begin to think around the batch workflow where this becomes a problem. I've had my load, where I've had to wait 5, 10, 15, maybe even 60 minutes to take that data from my operational domain to my data domain. And that latency is impacting what my analytics team can do. Because I am adding, especially with a lake, I'm adding the transformation further down the stream, I'm potentially having to repeat this process time and time again. I'm adding complexity and brittleness. Because ultimately, I'm creating a new challenge here. There's a need to remodel to suit a different source because I'm fundamentally expecting my data team, who sit in the middle of the chain, to be responsible for understanding what both the consumers want and the producers give them. That's a high cognitive load, and I'm probably going to try and fix that once, and then have someone else come along and fix that again, and again, and again, and ultimately not really address where this came from, but just constantly building new pieces. And that creates risk, because if someone changes what that data looks like at the top of the stream, I now have 10 processes to fix. I have 10 different consumers who are complaining that the data source doesn't look right for them. And as we move into this world of AI, I'm sure you've seen how many stages here are talking about AI today. We have a new problem. Now my analytical domain is a key fundamental part of my business's operational domain if I'm using something like Gen AI to feed back into how I interact with my customers, how I diagnose illnesses, how I predict what is going to happen in the markets. I'm creating a flawed, potentially, but certainly risky and polluted supply chain of data in my organization. And as data becomes more and more important, I can't treat it as an exhaust. I have to be treating it as another product that my business delivers. And that becomes, as I said, even more of a challenge as I'm beginning to feed back. Because as I have these breaks in my chain, as I have data that is maybe out of sync or flawed, I need to be able to track where this is going as well. If I buy an iPhone and the screen suddenly stops working, I need to be able to go back to the Apple Store and return it and use my warranty to get an iPhone that actually works. If my business is going to be looking at data as a product, then I need to make sure I have guarantee and controls and QA as part of that as well. Because it's going to become the beating heart of my business. It's going to become the nervous system. It's how I'm going to help understand where that data is flowing. And when I have real-time use cases, I need to be able to look into that, to audit it, to understand it at the second that it happens. And that's the fundamental challenges with batch data pipelines. We either have a monolithic data warehouse where everything is dropped to and we are trapped in the flow of how that works. We're putting too much pressure on our data onboarding engineers or our data warehouse engineers to be the controllers, the police of where that data is moving. And the tedious data preparation is being handled by people who might lack domain expertise. And it becomes harder to have quality and trustworthy data information. That data is becoming unreliable. If I am waiting on those fixes to be corrected, then how do I know it's going to work with my downstream application? If I'm running multiple processes, how can I even trust that the data that's being consumed by one part of the organization is the same data I have? I'm starting to create deltas in my understanding of what's happening. And all of that is adding to the cost of using data in my business. I have redundancy. I have added complexity. I have poor governance, so I can't even understand where to go to solve those problems. All of this is made worse and worse as I add more and more. And if I have those bottlenecks, people are going to go out and not use the system I built, and they're going to add even more on top of that. And I've seen this happen when I was working in that world as well. And it just becomes a self-perpetuating challenge. The goal, ultimately, is to look at those pieces in the box sitting in the red at the bottom and finding out how we can move to a new point of view. And ultimately, the driver for that is data streaming. Streaming, by its nature, obviously encourages real time. But there's much more to it than simply getting the data faster. It's about knowing that you can build data once, that you can make it trustworthy, that you can govern the quality and the accessibility of that data, and that you can use it anywhere and shift the processing to those who actually understand what is happening, be able to shift a lot of those challenges left, and stop thinking of data as just something that's additive to how our business runs, and begin to explore the world of data product thinking. And the best part is that we're cleaning it because we are capturing it at source. You know, that water bottle that I have on my desk, that didn't wait to get to a bottling factory. It was bottled as close to where it came out of the ground as possible. I want my data to be fresh out of the spring. I don't want it to be waiting until it's somewhere in the middle of a city to be put into a bottle. I want to make sure by doing that that I'm not repeating processes. You know, I'm saving that complexity, I'm reducing the challenges. And I want to have visibility of this as it happens. If I'm building a ubiquitous data flow, and there is some challenge in some part of that flow, I need to have an understanding of where that came from to get to where we are now, while having the expectation that I can flow all the way over to my AI and ML products to feed back into my operational domain to have better insight as I build out my ML-based applications. It's about shifting my thinking. One of my colleagues later will be talking about how to build Gen AI products, taking advantage of streaming. If you want to see a more practical, technical and hands-on solution around this. But these 4 key points at the architectural level are what's really important. You are going to find challenges if you tightly couple your application architecture. By the very nature of the bureaucracy that creates, of the replication it creates, working in a way that enables multi-subscribers, that encourages sharing, while still presenting federation to make sure that there are the right rules in place for how that data is accessed, builds an opportunity for data to be used by those who really need it. By shifting the responsibility to the left, I'm no longer doing my wrangling downstream. I'm not letting the sheep out into the field and then having to go find a sheepdog that can go and collect them back in. I'm guiding them to where they need to go. That stream has everything in place, be it business metadata, structure, the opportunity to replay and to rematerialize a current state. Everything is there for me to enable my ability to access that data. By moving to an event flow, I have the beautiful convenience that really a batch was already a stream. It was just a bounded stream. It was point 1 to point 3, then point 4 to point 6. So even if my source is still batch-oriented, I can build a streaming consumer, I can build a streaming pipeline, and wait for that batch source, that batch producer, to modernize. And have my applications around the business think in streams, work in streams, and be event-driven, even if I have some batch challenges that I can't tackle straight away. And the final beauty of this all is nobody knows what the future looks like. If I was thinking about Gen AI use cases 6 years ago, I was probably a pretty forward-thinking person. But now it's becoming table stakes as a business. There's an increased scale because of that in how much data I maybe need to consume from my mobile application, from my customer 360 point of view. I can't build an architecture today without having some scalability for the future. And rather than traditional batch-oriented ETL being very point-in-time query-based, run this process of the last 5 minutes of data in under 2 minutes so I can handle the next one in 5 minutes' time. If I'm using stream processing, then I can scale that processing as the data comes through. If I have 0 events happening, then let's scale down to 0 or scale down to 1. But it's Black Friday, it's 3 p.m., and suddenly everyone is trying to buy our new widget. That's OK. I'm doing continuous processing, and I simply scale up on the fly. And all my consumers know what's happening because they are part of that stream. They are keeping up with the demand as it exists. And as we shift our thinking towards that pattern, we need to start improving our trust in our data and that requires data product thinking. It's not about looking at a source and figuring out who needs it downstream. It's about looking at a business data problem and then stepping back to understand where should I be taking data from? What mixed sources do I have in my organization that would be better working together? The exact same way we would if we were building an application product. If I was building a fraud tool, then I would definitely want my banking transaction part of the organization, my retail bank, speaking to my security team. So why don't I work the same way with my data? The same with delivery management. I'm no longer just competing with who has the fastest drivers to get my food orders that last mile. Now I need to have the people who have the best routing to get the drivers there the quickest. I need to have the people who have the best insight into my customers to know that maybe Alex doesn't tend to care too much if he waits an extra 5 minutes for his pizza, but his marketing team, they really do. So I can build out a better view, of what's going on to deliver a better product to my end consumers. And as Harvard Business Review kind of calls out here, this is a pattern that's happening across the industry. Building around these tools doesn't just provide better products, it makes systems more efficient, it reduces TCO, and most importantly, it reduces the risk. When I have better quality products, I have better quality systems. The same reason you'd work with any vendor at a company like this. We need to be thinking that same way with our data. And the beautiful thing about this is it creates a flywheel. When I have my starting point, so let's just say it was that retail or purchase use case, the first step might be converting an existing batch process into a stream. Or, on the other hand, looking at a data product and finding the sources that fit. So maybe my web application is now going to be stream compatible, and it's now got much richer information. I'm sure over the last few years you've realized your banking apps no longer promise to take 24 hours to update for you or an hour, but instead can show you pretty much instantly that you've sent money to another bank, and then if you're sharing between your own accounts, you've probably had a push notification from both services. Part of that is because a lot of these banks are adopting streaming. That customer view is being delivered by a stream underneath that checks the transactions, checks the KYC, and builds out everything else. And that process that sits in the middle, that builds the data product, that allows this to be multicast to those multiple services, is then probably going to be useful elsewhere. Now our regulation part of our business can subscribe to that stream for AML use cases, so they can be reporting in real time to their required bodies. If I'm a financial organization that works in the trading world, it's not just about settling a trade faster, it's about being able to share that with the DTCC so I can move funds around so that we have enough capital to carry on trading tomorrow. That I can send it to our regulators to show that our book of business is healthy, that I can have back office and front office having a complete view. And we see this pattern time and time again where once the stream is present, once the stream is available, new use cases suddenly exist. And because people can trust that product, because they know what it's going to look like, because they're not being bottlenecked by a process in the middle, they know that they can turn up and access that demand immediately. Fundamentally, it's moving from a data mess to data products that are available anywhere and everywhere. And Confluent works to help with this by working on 4 key pillars. Obviously, the stream is by far the most important part of this. Confluent's history comes from our founders being the people who worked at LinkedIn and built Apache Kafka, and since then, Confluent as a company has been able to become the market leader in the world of data streaming. But as we build that out, we saw that demand to make this easier and to make this more scalable. And although the stream sits at the middle of that, it's supported by some core key pillars. First of all is connection. Like I said earlier, there's going to be sources that can't change overnight, that don't make data easily accessible. I myself started on the mainframe. DB2 is a tough beast to work with. But if I can expose one stream of change data capture from DB2, I can now reduce the number of COBOL applications that have to interact with my DB2 system. I can reduce my costs of running my mainframe. And instead of having to go through a COBOL application and then send to my web app, if I'm exposing once over a stream and people know what that stream looks like, now my web app can consume straight away off my stream, while my other applications also consume from that same source. So using that Connect library, whether it be databases, whether it be your CRM, it's all about enabling the ability to be able to plug and play with the most important sources in your system to build out that data product that you need. The next piece is processing. If I am building a product, it's important that it doesn't turn up in parts. Unless you work at Lego, you're probably not going to be particularly well liked if you send your customers their product and it has the battery separate from the screen, separate from the motherboard. People expect to have a packaged product with a guarantee, with a warranty. And processing is one of the ways that we can define what does this look like. Let's get rid of the noise, or let's provide the valuable bits to you. Let's convert a UID to a name and an email, so that when I have those data products sitting on the right-hand side, they actually provide the information that my downstream systems need. And the final piece of that is around the governance and discoverability. If I'm moving away from a centralized system, I have to think about how decentralized I want my tooling to be. If it's entirely decentralized, I probably just recreate my monolith. I just have silos that exist across my business. So the best way to solve this is to build federation. What are the rules of how this can look? How do I control who can request access to this? What is my platform for going and finding and discovering this information and being able to use it properly? That's rules, but it's also metadata. It's the lineage. It's understanding what the quality of my product is going to look like. And that begins to allow us to build out that data lifecycle, where I'll look for those continuous sources of information across my databases, where I'll govern this, I'll tag it, I'll recognize that I have PII, and this could create a problem downstream for my regulation. So I can do things like field-level encryption on PII data, so I know that I can protect on the right-hand side who can actually access Alex's mobile phone number or social security number. That I can enrich and have a cleaned and more product-focused piece of data that I can define and share across my organization, and then find those opportunities to multicast, increase my return on investment because I recognize where I have multiple consumers. And if you are a data engineer who's looking at working with Confluent, you're going to see that by taking advantage of some of these core product offerings. The stream goes without saying. It's our bread and butter. But the schema management exists as the starting point of building that rulebook. What does this data look like? How can it evolve? Who in our pipeline needs to sign up to this data contract? When I want to improve this data, can I take advantage of Flink stream processing? So I have the ability to materialize a stream so that I can actually create a table view of what it is that I want to interact with, while others can consume the deltas and the events as they happen. Having a point of discoverability, the data portal, where anyone with the right access privileges can go in, recognize that they need to see the transaction log from our e-commerce store to understand whether I should recommend Alex some new shoes because he scuffed them up walking around the hall floor today. And also the auditability, the lineage. If data becomes a product, data needs to be monitored and administrated the same way we would our infrastructure systems, so they can have a trustworthy relationship between where that data comes from and where it's delivered to. And coming soon will be Tableflow. So there are parts of our organization who don't think in streams, but do want access to the richest and quickest information, our peers and colleagues in the BI space. They want to be able to see a representation of what's happening in our operational domain as quickly as possible. So how can I take advantage of open formats like Apache Iceberg to expose this information to them to tackle with their own compute? Where fundamentally I can write my data once, pull from my database with change data capture, pull from my applications with events, pull from my logs, pull from my CRM, send that to the stream, build my data product using Flink, build around this event-driven architecture and event-driven design, and then find out where that needs to go. Do I need to read this as a Kafka topic, as an application? So just capturing those events as I see them in a refined way and consume them, well, as one would expect. Do I need to take advantage of my connectors again so that I can send this out to my operational data stores, to my data lake, to my data warehouse? Or once we have Tableflow available, can I just ask this a question? Can I plug this in with Snowflake? Can I plug this in with Trino or Spark or DuckDB? And actually just ask, what's happening in my environment? This idea of the Kappa architecture, that the stream is both the materialized view and the changes. And with this architecture, I can begin to look for that vision of ultimately trusting data and having data as a product. So as we get to the closing few minutes, how can I solve this problem? You want to go out and you want to look at where those challenges exist. Ask the question of who is being burdened by our current batch-based pipelines. Maybe there's a query that the BI team have been talking about. Maybe there are reports that you have to share to your customers, where the bottleneck has always been that we're collecting data from several sources, and every end of quarter, we have to go into a mad rush where we spend 2 weeks looking for Excel spreadsheets and CSVs and message queues and Lord knows what else. What would happen if we tried to shift that problem to the left, fix it at source, make it so it was just naturally something we could deal with on the fly? By stepping back and building that improvement, at our first state where we address it, great news, we've fixed the problem, we've made it easier and quicker and safer to access this data. But suddenly we realize this can be multicast. It's not just going to my data lake for my business reporting, it's going to my data warehouse for some other use case. It's going into my chatbot for my interactions. And suddenly that stream lineage that I've shown a few times today begins to proliferate, the flywheel spins, and we can access the data that we need along the way. Because ultimately the goal here is to get your data to the right place, in the right format, at the right time. And then that will naturally unlock new capabilities and endless use cases along the way. To break down that divide of who can and should access the data, to be able to build with better scalability because you're obviously addressing up front, and to be able to develop faster and with higher levels of trust. I won't read the example from the customer at the bottom, but you can go to our website and see that this genuinely makes a difference. It changes how business runs because thinking of data as a product and not an exhaust can allow you to completely change how you look at your way of working in your industry. With that, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. If you have any questions, I think I have a couple of minutes left, so I might be able to fit in one or two. Otherwise, thank you all for coming.